Hello there. We are going to be installing the truss rod. I'm at the point now of finding my centre line. Now if you look here, it looks pretty even, but in actual fact one side of the maple is thicker than the other. So if I just measure and then draw a line straight down the middle, it won't actually be right in the centre of this spotted gum stripe, which once I've narrowed it down, especially the top end of the neck here, it might be noticeable that it's not in the middle. I couldn't notice it wasn't in the middle until I measured it. Once I measured it, now it stands out to me. So this side is about between 1 millimetre and 0.5 millimetre thicker than this side as far as the maple goes. So what I've been doing is just putting this side on the sanding beam and just sanding it down just to take off 0.5 mil or so that it's about the same. It's not really super critical. I mean, a lot of this is going to get cut off anyway, but the centre line, I just really want it in the centre of the stripe for obvious reasons. So I'm going to sand that back and then I'll mark the centre line. Okay, centre line's done. So I just used the calipers, found the width, got the width, then halved it to get a centre point, marked it from this side, then I went over, did the same, left it the same, marked it from the other side to see that they were the same spot. Then I also measured the centre strip of timber, the width of it, halved it to make sure it was in the same spot, it was centred in that as well. Did that the whole way down, the marks came out in the same spot the whole way down, so I knew it was centred, and ruled my line in using my straight edge, which you can hopefully see that line there, probably more pronounced up this end. So we now have a centre line. Okay, so then what we need to do then is measure the depth. In this case, the depth of my truss rod is 9 millimetres and the width is 6 millimetres. So I'm going to cut a 6 millimetre wide channel because you want it to be a fairly tight fit if you can. And it's 9 millimetres deep, but I'm not going to cut it 9 millimetres deep on my first pass. I'm going to do about a 7 mil pass, and then I might try and take another mil off. When I did my test build, my prototype, I accidentally went about 10 to 10.5 millimetres deep, which was too deep. It turned out to be actually not too bad. If there's no tension on the truss rod will rattle, but once you put a bit of tension on the truss rod, it stopped, but it's not ideal. You definitely don't want gaps. You definitely want it to be a snug fit. So always with routing, you cut something a little bit smaller than you want, then you test fit it and then go a bit more. Anyway, I think that's all we need to cover, but you do need to think about, oh, the other thing is this is 6 mils wide, but this actual point here, this little adjustment nut is actually, on this truss rod, is actually 7 mils wide, so I need to cut a little bit wider from that. You can just use a chisel. Alright, middle of winter, it's freezing cold here, so I really want to get this done and get out of here. I've set the depth of my router bit to 6 millimetres, or it's sticking above here by 7 millimetres. Now we want the channel to be 9, so we'll do 2 passes, one at 7, and then we'll go in a couple more mils. I have on the neck blank here, you can see I've got it headstock down. This is where I want it to start cutting from, and I want to finish about here. So I've got that marked so I can see. So this is my, I've got a, there's a line here which is in line with the router bit, so I know if I have those lines meeting each other, then I know that's my start point. So I'm going to basically bring it in position here. I've got a fence behind it here, so I've got it lined up and drop it down onto that bit, slowly drop it down. It should route in and then just slide it along. That's the theory. We'll see how we go.
Okay. Bit of a disaster. The router has slipped. It's moved. And I just checked, it's gone down to 16.9 millimeters deep. Supposed to be 7 mils. I don't know for how much of its travel it started doing that. It just started to feel different. And yeah, the clamp, I've got a clamp on it which tells it the, the height. It's obviously slipped and the thing sprung up. That's really shit. I had it done up tight. I'm a bit annoyed. 16 mils deep, 16.9, that's getting close to going through the bottom of the neck. I will have to fill it with sawdust and glue, and I can fill it in. I just hope when I'm making the neck I don't go through it. It's repairable, so long as I don't have to go through it when I'm making a guitar. That will be the thickest part of the neck because it's the center, but I'm quite angry about that. I've set it up again, ready to go again, but on further investigation, the clamp didn't slip. The router bit had actually moved up. It was done up tight. And I know it was done up tight because when I went to put it back down into the shaft, the bolt was tight. So I undid it and I've pushed it back, done it up tight, make sure it's really tight this time. That's weird. Try and continue to cut. I have to disassemble half the table. Well, I have to take it off the table, have a look at it to be sure, but maybe the collet's broken. I hope not. So I'm going to try now and see if we can finish this anyway and get it done. But yeah, the router bit had moved up. The collet wasn't gripping it, so maybe the collet's broken. Hopefully not. We'll finish the cut now and see how we go. The router bit just snapped clean off. I'll show you. Hopefully you can see that. The router bit should have been sticking up above the table, so I don't know where the other bit of it's gone. It's on the ground. Is it hot? No. So the good news is I had a spare bit. I'm thinking that when the bit slid up, it probably tilted or something like that happened, and it got stressed, and then that's why it broke when I put it back and redid it, and that's why it broke, because it got stressed. It must have come up almost to the end of the collet, and maybe it tilted or something, and that put like a crack in it or a stress in it, and then it just broke later on. I don't know if you can see it, but just here is where it suddenly is the deep bit, just in here. You can actually see a little bit there where it suddenly went deeper, and it got deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper up until that point where I kind of realised something had gone wrong. So I've just marked on here the little pencil marks. I need to widen it between here and here. No, did I knock you off? No, you can still see it.
So I ended up having to chisel down about 2 millimeters more to allow for the adjustment screw there. So if I put it in now though, I need to just push it down, but then it goes in, and that's all fitting in quite nicely.
G'day, it's the next day, and yesterday we had a disaster with the truss rod depth. So we carved the channel for the truss rod, and the bit moved up out of the collet and made the hole much deeper than we wanted to be in certain spots. So the worst spot here, it gets down to 16.8 mils. So I just want to explain why that's a disaster. Here is the prototype guitar I built. This guitar will actually have some changes from the prototype because I learnt a few things while building this. But you can see here, the neck without the fretboard on is quite thin. So if I measure this here with my calipers, you can see there, 15.2 millimeters. That's about as thin as it gets. I think 15.1 is as thin as it gets in the thinnest part. Now, some of you might be concerned, isn't that too thin for a neck? No, this is only pine. And with a truss rod and a hardwood fretboard on, it worked just fine. So, no, it's not too thin. The thinner the neck is, the kind of easier it is to play, especially when you've got hand injuries like I have. So, it was important to me. Of course, if the neck is 15 mils, and we've gone down to a depth of 16.8, that's going to come through on the back of the neck. We're going to have a hole. I can fill it in with sawdust and glue, but it'll look terrible. So really, to make it look decent, I would have to cut a chunk out and put another chunk in. That's going to leave me with lines on the back, which will spoil the aesthetic a little bit. You might also, be able to feel it on the back of the neck, or that wouldn't be too bad. Kind of help you know where you are in the neck sometimes as well. It wouldn't be a disaster, but it's just not what I want. So I emailed my brothers and told them the situation I had, and one of them told me to stop using cheap router bits, which is fair enough. I have now ordered that router bit in a locally made, more expensive version. So that will arrive, I don't know when, but I've ordered it. My other brother suggested that I actually cut this in half, the whole thing, put another piece of timber in the middle, whatever I want it to be, and make it a 5-piece laminate instead of a 3-piece laminate, which is something you could do to save it. I quite like this 3-piece though. I think 5-piece is too busy for me, but it's an option. What I've decided to do though is something that actually occurred to me while I was writing the email, because I was really a bit depressed and pretty upset. But I realised that this is quite thick. This is 60 mils deep. This guitar, the body here, I pay no attention to colours, I was just testing colours. It's 41 mils thick, so this whole guitar is 41 mils thick. This bit here is about 9 mils above here. So if I count the whole neck, because I do want the bottom of this to show on the back of the guitar, that's really, the whole thing is 50 mils. I've got 60 here. So if I make it the same size as this, I've got room to play with. So my solution is going to be to shave the top off. Maybe 5 mils, maybe 7 mils, take that off. So that 16.8 mils will end up being around about 10 mils. And then I don't have to do it. I can just do a little bit of filling to bring the truss rod up to the right height, to get it touching the bottom of the truss rod there, and it'll be done. Just setting my scribe to 5 millimeters, and let's get that a little bit. That's right. If you want to make one of these scribes, I have a video of me making this. Cross promotions it's called, isn't it? In case you didn't know what a scribe was for, don't know if you can see it, but it's made a line along the top there, and it just gives it a completely straight line in line with the top, so I know when I've taken off about 5 mil. it's very hard to get a uniform sanding with it. Yeah. So I've got it's concave in the middle, so I've got a fair bit of relief in it. So at its highest points on the ends, it's about 1.5 millimeters higher than the lowest points in this sort of section just here, which is kind of weird. It's sort of the opposite to sanding on a sanding beam or perhaps using a plane, where for some reason it's sanding more out of the middle than it does on the ends, where normally I would think the ends would be the most vulnerable to sanding, but in this case with this thing it seems to sand less on the ends. Don't know why. Don't understand it really. Also got a bit of a ridge in part of it, I think around here somewhere in the middle. It's like high in the middle. So I think I am actually going to have to plane it, since the only guaranteed way I know of getting it really flat fairly quickly. Yeah. I'm going to be very gentle with it though, because I really don't want the tear out, because I'm going to have to do a lot more sanding again. I'll have to do it by hand because this thing is just a bit too hard. It did get it down. I got the 5 mils down, which is great. It's probably going to end up more than 5 mils now because it's a bit low here, so by the time I get it all down, it's probably going to end up about 6-7 mils, which is fine. Oh wow. So if you look at the shavings I'm taking, tiny, right? Hardly anything. And already I've got tear out. Look at that. It's a different art form, I think, using those belt sanders. So I went back to planing because that's kind of, I know how to level with the plane now. And it's pretty level. But I've lost now 8 millimeters. So 5 millimeters with the belt sander and another 3 millimeters of planing to try and get it flat again. But that's okay because, you know, you can see now the channels are quite shallow here, and that deep bit there, which is probably more visible to you now, is probably around about the correct depth now. So I might not even have to do any filling, or maybe just a tiny bit in that section, and then I'll have to reroute the truss rod channel at some stage. But for now, I'm going to do my old trick, get on here and start sanding, get this thing nice and flat and level, and I'll probably have to route it tomorrow, so I'm going to run over the light today, I think. Finished giving it a bit of a sand. It's looking really nice and flat. Like if I go across this way or across this way, it's very flat, looking really good. What I do notice though, when I say very flat, there's the tiny, slightest bit of relief. So it's a little bit, I can see a little bit lower through here than it is on the ends. Just a tiny bit. It's like, it's almost, you have to get really low and you can just see a shadow behind there. So, and I mean when I move it, you can hear that it's contacting a lot of the fretboard. Doesn't matter how I put it, it's in contact. So that's good. The tiny little bit of relief is actually good. What I found was when I made this fretboard, when I actually put my frets on, like I had this glued, the fretboard glued on and everything, when I put the frets in, I actually ended up with back bow in the neck. That apparently is because when you put the frets in, you of course have to make the slots slightly thinner than the tang of the fret, the part that goes into the wood. Otherwise the tangs won't grip the wood, even though I do put glue as well, super glue. What happens then, of course, is all these tangs going in, 24 of them, along the length here, it tends to push the timber out. But of course the bottom, the tang never goes through the bottom. So it pushes the top out and the bottom compresses, and so it gets back bow. This being hardwood and my other neck being softwood, this had more of an effect on the neck and actually caused the neck to have back bow. Some people deliberately, I am told, some luthiers deliberately put a little bit of relief in the neck when they're building it to allow for this, so that the back bow created by the fretboard balances out and they end up with a straight neck. I'm not experienced enough to know how much relief to put into a neck to counter the back bow of a fretboard. I mean, I've only made one fretboard and one neck before. So, but the fact that I have a tiny bit of relief in there, I'm not going to try and get it out. I'm just going to leave it because I know that definitely with this one it did cause back bow. Time to use the belt sander again with the 40 grit on it again, because now that we've got the top surface all okay, still need to reroute the truss rod channel, but otherwise it's okay. But because we took 5 or 7, maybe 7 or 8 millimeters off the top deck, the headstock that was up to about where this line is here has now moved over to here. So the headstock's now too short. It needs to be about 180 millimeters long, which is about to here. So if I turn it over for you, you can see here, I've drawn on pencil. That's the new line I want there, that dark line. So I've got to take off about 5 mils. I'm going to try and sand this all off using that 40 grit, trying to maintain this angle the whole time. Get it pretty close with the 40 grit, and then I'll switch over to the 80 grit to get it onto the line itself. And what you're seeing there, that second line is pretty much the thickness of the headstock. That was the old line I had there down the middle, that's now redundant. And I've drawn a little bit on here just to remind myself I've got to put a volute in there. Time to route the channel. Please cross your fingers for me. Okay, so it's in. Truss rod is in, and I had to, because this position has changed, but actually had to change the position of the truss rod a little bit, so I had to re-chisel this bit because it goes down lower. Hi, I'm in my tiny shed. Hopefully you can see this. So I put the truss rod in, as you know, and down this end, the truss rod channel was a little bit longer than we needed it to be because of the mistaken adjustments we had to make, or we had to take another extra bit off the top. That actually had the effect of moving the truss rod position a little bit. So I put this little block in here to stop it sliding down too far this way. But up this end, it still does slide a little bit, so it can move. You can see there it moves up a little bit, and there's like a gap there. I don't want it to move up, I want it to stay back here, like that. So what I want to do, and I also thought maybe I wouldn't mind having it covered here where the nut will be. So I've made this little bit of timber here. Alright, so I've just finished making the little plug. It's turned out fairly small. I've even managed to write a little round channel on that end so it fits the shape of the truss rod in case it does actually press onto it, won't jam it. So that's our little spot there. Just fit on like that, and I can push it in now, and it sits almost flush. I'll just have to sand a little bit when I've finished it.
This concludes the worst truss rod installation in human history. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, consider subscribing to Cheapskate.